Hi everybody, this is the future of Elasticsearch, Open Distro for Elasticsearch. My name is Kyle Davis. I am the Senior Developer Advocate for Open Distro for Elasticsearch, as you might have guessed. I work at Amazon, and today we're going to go over four main things. We're going to go over the project in whole, the key features that we have in the project, our roadmap, and then how you can join us and contribute to the project. Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Let's look at a high-level overview of the project, and then we'll go into some more detail as we go further. So TLDR, if you've never used Elasticsearch and Kibana, Elasticsearch is a distributed full-text search engine built in Java with the Lucene library, and Kibana is a UI that interacts with Elasticsearch for visualization and interacting with the data. It's built in TypeScript, and it uses the Node.js runtime. Both of these things are Apache 2.0 licensed, which will become a theme and important later on as we go through. They're both extensible via plugins, which is also something that is important to know. By themselves, they don't do a whole lot, and when you add plugins in, it enables you to really change what the whole thing does. So we'll explore those a little bit later too. So what is Open Distro for Elasticsearch? Now, the word distro in here is a little bit unusual. When most people think of distros, they think of Linux distributions. So things like Ubuntu. And what are those? Well, Linux, of course, is an open source operating system, but then the distribution actually adds a whole lot of other features to that operating system that makes it easier to use or more useful, something along those lines. So by itself, it doesn't necessarily change the software, but what it does is it adds things to it and surrounds it and makes it a more usable whole. And the same thing exists really for Open Distro for Elasticsearch. So basically, we're a collection of Kibana and Elasticsearch plugins that are all Apache 2.0 licensed. Then we have a number of tools that interact with Elasticsearch and Kibana, which are also Apache 2.0 licensed. And finally, a multi-platform installer, which enables you to take all this stuff that we're talking about, Kibana, Elasticsearch, the plugins that make up the distribution, and these tools, and puts them together so you don't have to configure all this yourself. So that makes up Open Distro for Elasticsearch. Now, you may ask, what's Amazon's involvement and why did we get involved with this? Basically, Amazon is one of the main motivators for it. We kind of launched the open source project that is Open Distro for Elasticsearch, and we continue to be one of the main drivers for it. And what's our motivation here? Our motivation here is that we actually really love Elasticsearch. Elasticsearch is used in two primary ways. The first way is, of course, for full text search, which you might have guessed from the name Elasticsearch. And then the second part is for log search and ingestion, which actually tends to be the predominant thing that people do with Elasticsearch these days. And honestly, those two use cases make up a huge chunk of what a modern application has to do. So it's incredibly useful, and we can't even imagine the internet without it. It's kind of super important to everything. So we really love it, and we think that everybody should be using it. We think that open source matters. Now, this is something that you may have seen a lot of lip service for. People saying, oh, a CEO getting on stage and saying, oh, open source matters to us. Some of those are genuine, some of those are not. But to us and our project, open source matters a great deal. And here's why. Open source is a nice thing for a lot of people, but what it really means is you have the options to do things with the software that you want to do. So in that case, it's for those people who may not have any option but to use open source. Now you may think, okay, that's fine. A lot of times people adopt open source for budgetary reasons or something like that, but it goes much deeper than that. For a lot of organizations, open source is the preferred option in that it enables them to avoid any intellectual property issues, and it avoids them having to deal with restrictions that other licensees may place on them. So open source, true open source really matters, right? And this is something that we firmly believe in. And so we also believe that people who are building and running software should have the choices on the tools that they use. So with open source, you can usually be sure that there's no gotchas involved with it, and you don't have to get a lawyer involved, and you can make a pure technology choice. And we think that really matters. So the other thing that we looked at is that users need more. Now, I did indicate that Elasticsearch and Kibana are by themselves Apache 2.0, which is great. But there's a lot of other distributions of Elasticsearch out there that bundle in a bunch of non-free things with them. And if you just try to use the free part of it, you don't get a whole lot out of it. It's kind of an empty shell. So we looked at what users need the most, and we built those things. So as an example, we have a SQL plugin, which enables you to interact with the data in a way that's pretty familiar to most people. We have a full security suite, which enables you to make sure the data that you have involved is really and truly secure and is not something that somebody can access in an unforeseen way. We have things that are really promising as well. So we have a plugin for KNN, so nearest neighbor, which is a really promising technology that we think lots of people can use. So we looked at the things that users might need or want, and we helped those get into the distribution, or we wrote them ourselves. And we also believe that open source is a real positive for the community and for users. From the perspective of the community, we think that open source is a great thing to exist in a landscape of both open source and closed source or paid for products. Open source can be a huge driver of innovation, and we think it's really important to keep technology on pace. So contributing to open source really does keep that pace up for everybody who's using Elasticsearch or Kibana. And for users, there's a huge opportunity here. For users, what this does is enables you to have an input into the roadmap, enables you to actually participate in things and not have to worry about anything else. Now, we are true open source in that we don't require you to sign a contributor license agreement. We try to keep things as simple as possible and as straightforward as possible. And with that, you can really start participating without having to do a whole lot, without having to get cleared by a lot of different bodies in your organization. It's a really straightforward process to get involved, and it can be a real big impact for you as a developer or you as someone who operates Elasticsearch to have a really opportunity here to really influence how the software you use is built. So let's dive into the features that Open Distro for Elasticsearch provides. When I first started learning about Open Distro for Elasticsearch, I had a little bit of a hard time really understanding what it really was. So I started thinking about it kind of like a power strip that you would plug in your computer and all sorts of different things into. So in this case, it's kind of like Elasticsearch and Kibana are two parallel power strips. And we're going to go ahead and plug different things into it. And these are, of course, the plugins. It's a bit of an on-the-nose analogy. But we have things like SQL and notifications. And these are, SQL enables you to interact with data in a comfortable way. And notifications enables, Elasticsearch to let other entities or people even know what's going on inside the cluster. We have a security plugin that enables you to kind of keep it locked down in a way that makes sense for your users. And then we have anomaly detection to detect when data kind of goes out of a prescribed bandwidth of valid ranges. So these are all things that live on the data side of things. And then we have plugins on Kibana, which are more the user interface side of things. So in that case, we have plugins like reports and notifications, and these help you build things that enable others to understand the data inside Kibana. And they are purely working with the user interface, so they don't actually have an allegory or an analogous plugin on the other side. So on the right side, we have as well plugins that have connections to the other ones as well. So they share. There's a component on the actual Elasticsearch side and a component on the Kibana side. And then the same for anomaly detection. So this provides kind of the connective tissue between these two pieces. So this is all kind of knitted together with the Open Distro installer. And like I said, this enables you to install this without having to configure everything and dive deep into YAML in unfortunate ways. So we have this on multiple different platforms. So that's the best way to kind of think about it at a high level. But let's go into those features that I mentioned and some of those and explore what they actually mean. So one of the core things we have is security and access control for Elasticsearch and Kibana. First up, you have node-to-node encryption, and you may have heard, the idea that everything that we do must be encrypted if it leaves the machine, and we really take that to heart. So, being a distributed search engine, Elasticsearch has a number of different nodes, and those nodes can communicate with our security plugin in an encrypted fashion. So that way, no matter what type of network it's traversing, the information being sent back and forth is private to those nodes. So it really does increase the ability for you to say to your customers that the information being sent is kept in a secure way. We have authentication built in from basic authentication, which is managed by Kibana and Elasticsearch, all the way through to different things that would integrate in. So, for example, you might integrate in your organization LDAP or something like that, and we can integrate that directly, so you don't have to redefine your users everywhere. We have role-based access control, and I love role-based access control because once people kind of understand what it does, it really does change how you think about security and securing something like Elasticsearch. Effectively, you have users that belong to a role, and then you have many users there. So if you make changes to that role, well, then the users kind of inherit those different changes. And it makes managing, especially a large number of users, really straightforward. So kind of integrating in with that, we have multiple different layers of access restrictions. So in this case, we have index, which is what most people think of would be a traditional thing. So an index is kind of the primary way that you organize data in Elasticsearch. And you can, of course, have a role have access to an index, but you can also go deeper than that and have document-based access control. So a user can only have access to certain documents. And then we go all the way down to field level access restrictions, which I think are actually really fascinating. Field level basically means that user A can have access to a document and can see an entirely different set of fields than user B, who has access to that same document. Now, by itself, that seems interesting and good, but when you start thinking about it, it separates the structure of your data from the access control layer of your data. So you can structure your data appropriately for the technology that you want to have. So you have your indexes and your documents and your fields, and then you have the layer of access control on top of that in restrictions based on fields, which really enable you to have a great way of separating those two things out. One of the table stakes features that people also have requested is audit logging to make sure you know who is accessing data when. And then finally, the top points here, we're all talking about Elasticsearch, but from the Kibana side, we have multi-tenancy, which enables Kibana-managed objects such as visualizations and charts and graphs to be also connected to the users as well. So this is really important, especially as you do more and more reporting, that those reports are only going to people who need to see them. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk about the query languages available in Open Distro. Open Distro has a number of query languages. The kind of default for Elasticsearch, even outside of Open Distro, is the query DSL, or domain-specific language. And if you were to Google how to access something in Elasticsearch, you'd probably get query DSL queries. They're based in JSON, and they are not loved by many people. And I'm one of those people. They're incredibly powerful, but they are based on JSON, and it doesn't give you a whole lot of structure or clues on what to do next. So on the screen here, we have a query that basically looks at a list of computers, finds computers with RAM greater than 16,000, and returns the name. If you don't know query DSL very well, it can be very hard to understand what's going on here. Is range, is that a reserved word, or what is that? GT, what does that mean? It happens to mean greater than, but at first appearance, you may not know that. So Open Distro has SQL, and you can use a very familiar SQL dialect. So in this case, you're using a select name from computers where RAM is greater than 16,000, which many of us have written thousands of times in our career, things like that. So it becomes very intuitive for us once we kind of get that skill under our belt. And of course, we have ODBC and JDBC drivers, which enable you to connect to a variety of different software. And then we also have, which is a relatively new feature, piped processing language, which is very similar, but what that does is it kind of takes the concept that you would know for Unix pipes and applies it to data access. So, in this case, our sources computers, that's the index. We're using a where clause to reduce that index down, and then the fields pipe here, where we have name, and that's just returning the name values. So it's really a great way of looking at how to access data if you're trying to build a kind of exploratory way or an iterative way. It's a really straightforward query language for that. Shifting gears again, let's talk a little bit about alerting. We have a alerting plugin in Open Distro, and basically this allows you to run a query on a schedule. So example, run a query every 5 minutes, and this uses basic cron patterns, right? So you can do that at any time interval. And then trigger an alert when a condition is met. So for example, if you get, let's say you're looking at error codes for HTTP. If you have every 5 minutes, if you have more than 500 error codes, you can trigger an alert at that point. You just have to set that up quite simply. And then you take an action on that alert, and that enables you to alert either another computer process or a person to take action. So you can send off a Slack message or fire a webhook. There's a whole lot of options there. Along the same thread, we have anomaly detection. Now, they are quite different in how they operate, but you can think of anomaly detection as basically kind of like alerting that is done through machine learning. So it uses random cut forest to find outliers in your data. So let's just say you're looking at your typical invoice that's coming through, and your typical invoice is at a number. Let's just say $10. You can set up a detector which basically takes and looks at timestamps. You define timestamp field, and then a filter, which is what data you're looking at, and then the interval at which it runs. And then you add features to that detector, which is like an aggregation. So how you're aggregating it, a sum, a total, max, min, that sort of thing. And then what it will do is that you can observe the results and see what's happening with that. So as an example, with our invoices, if typically you're going at $10 and all of a sudden you get a lot of $1,000 invoices or a lot of 10-cent invoices, the anomaly detection would look at it and say, okay, that's out of bounds or not out of bounds. And then you set up alerts based on that and adjust the model as needed. And of course, you can manage to add or remove those things. A few other features that we have KNN, which we talked about a little bit earlier, which is great for building recommendation engines and fraud mitigation. We have index state management, so you can automatically manage indices as they get older or they grow in size, and you can change the index or retire that index, do all sorts of things there. And of course, we have notebooks, which adds that kind of layer of explanation to data, so two people can get the same information out of a bar chart than not. And we have trace analytics, which is great for taking, a microservices architecture and then being able to find out what's going on throughout that microservices architecture, right? So this enables you to look and see how things are running through a very complicated system. So let's take a time to look at the roadmap, what we're doing in 2021. We're looking at visualizations in 2021, something we'll be adding a lot to Kibana there. We've kind of built out a framework for that, and we hope to iterate on that quite quickly. How replication works, especially in regards to cross-cluster replication, so multiple different clusters talking to each other and replicating. We have a thing called Data Prepper, which is designed to accept data and transform it. It also works with trace analytics. That's coming out in the new year. We want to refine how we're deploying things. So especially with regards to Kubernetes, but other ways as well, we want to make this really easy to get into production. And we have a number of people focusing on geospatial enhancements, so how the data relates to the physical world. So if data is coming in from one side of the world versus the other, and how that may affect things, right? We have a focus there. And finally, we want to make extensibility even easier to implement and make things really easy for you to add and remove things as we go along, because this whole thing is built on the whole idea of plugins, right? Which is inherently extensible. We want to make it even better. So one of the cool things about Open Distro for Elasticsearch is that we work in the open. We work in public. And as such, we have a public active roadmap. It's available on our website. And this is the thing that we work from. We don't have a super secret roadmap that we keep internally. We are built as an open source project. So our developers are looking at this GitHub roadmap every day. We live and die by it. And we share it with you so you can see what's going on. We're completely transparent in that regard. So here's where we get into some of the interesting points. How can you, as a user, contribute and join in on the community? So I want to first talk about how you can contribute code to Open Distro. Like I mentioned earlier, it's quite easy. We don't put a lot of barriers in the way. We don't put contributor license agreements that you have to sign and get approvals on. We want you to dive right in. So the way Elasticsearch is built, it's built in Java. And so all the plugins are built using JVM languages. We use Kotlin and we use Java for those two languages. Right now we could have other ones, but those are the two that we use at the moment. And most of it is Java, although we have a growing kind of suite of Kotlin plugins as well, which is quite nice to develop in. And Kibana plugins are written in TypeScript. And TypeScript is, of course, a JavaScript variant. So you can dive right into that pretty readily. Other things that we have tools that are written in a number of other languages. We have a CLI tool called ODFE CLI. And by the way, if you ever see ODFE, it's Open Distro for Elasticsearch. It took me a good 3 weeks before I realized what that acronym meant. But this tool basically enables you to do all sorts of manipulation of and management of data from the command line. It's written in Golang, which is a great tool for that. We have a performance analyzer written in Java, and then we have a few odds and ends throughout the project written in Python, including a SQL CLI, which enables you to run SQL commands from the command line. So as you can see, between Java and the Java world, JavaScript, Golang, and Python, almost any developer will have experience in one of those, and we'd love to see you join in on that. If you don't want to contribute code, we have other ways to contribute as well. We absolutely love documentation contributions. They're really simple to use because everything's written in Markdown, and it's a really straightforward process to really contribute to that. I work with that team quite a bit, and boy, are we excited when we get a community contribution there. The same goes for the website. The website that we've shown before and we'll show again at the end is written all Markdown as well. So we love contributions there, and it's really simple to do that. You can do it all from GitHub. You don't even have to clone the repo. So really easy to contribite, and we're open to anything on those. And then a non-code way or non-written way to do that is just talk to us. We're a really open community. We'd love to hear anything. You can talk to me. You can talk to anybody on the team. And we really want to hear how you're using it. One special call out that we want to make is experience with Kubernetes. We know that more people are using Kubernetes every day, and it's something that we want to really refine the experience for Kubernetes. So even if you're not using Open Distro for Elasticsearch right now in Kubernetes, but you're an active Kubernetes user, we want to know how you're using it and how we can make Open Distro work for your deployments in Kubernetes. So super important area for us. The other thing I want to talk about is how you can connect with us, and we talked about what you can connect on, but how. We have bi-weekly community meetings. These are super interesting community meetings. We have a really engaged community that joins in. We are currently trying to figure out what our timeline is for 2021 as far as when we're going to do that, because we have people from all over the world joining, and we don't want people to join at 3 a.m., so we're really right now trying to figure out when that is going to be going forward. We may kind of rotate that around. But the contents of those meetings are really interesting in that you can hear from the team, hear what they have to say. We have presentations that we run. So it'll be people from our team or other teams that are working on Open Distro. Then we have a live Q&A portion, and I think that's super important. This is not a passive listening group. This is type in the chat and turn on your mic, turn on your video. We welcome that 100% in our community meetings, and they're really the lifeblood of our community. The other place that you can get involved is through our forums. We have a forum on our website, and it's a really active way to ask and answer questions and really get to know people who are involved in the community as well. So we have it's not something that you need to check in every day and keep up with hundreds of messages a day. We have a nice good pace of messages, and it really stays on topic. So we really love that. We also put our announcements there, so anytime we're seeking feedback or we're going to announce something new, it goes right on those forum posts. And you can access that from our website, which I'll read off now, opendistro.github.io/for-elasticsearch. Bit of a mouthful, but you can certainly find it on Google if you need to. That's all we have for today. It's a quick review. I know I would love for you to connect with me. My GitHub and Twitter are the same, and that's on the screen, as well as my LinkedIn. And I can get you connected with anybody on the team, and it would be great for us to connect. And I would love to see how you could use Open Distro for Elasticsearch. So thanks so much.